If you crave the darkest truths buried behind concrete walls, hit subscribe, tap like, and leave a comment, because once this door closes, there's no turning back. The silence inside. The alarm went off at 3:17 a.m., a sound so sharp it cut through the fog rolling off the Northern California coast. Pelican Bay State Prison never truly slept, but this was different. Red lights flashed across the razor wire as guards sprinted toward the security housing unit, the SHU, a concrete maze designed to swallow sound, time, and men. Inside cell D-117, Marcus Reed lay motionless on the floor. Officially, it would be called a medical emergency. That was the language Pelican Bay used when something went wrong that couldn't be explained cleanly. Reed had been in solitary for 17 years. No assault record inside prison. No contraband. No recent disciplinary write-ups. Just a man sealed in a windowless cell for 23 hours a day, accused of gang affiliation he had always denied. By sunrise, the prison had already decided how the story would end. Detective Elena Cruz arrived just after dawn, escorted through steel gates that slammed shut behind her with finality. She'd investigated deaths in custody before, but Pelican Bay carried a reputation even among seasoned law enforcement. Cases went quiet here. Questions had a way of dissolving into procedure. The SHU smelled of disinfectant and cold concrete. Cruz paused outside Reed's cell, noting the small details others missed. The mattress was flipped. The sink was still dripping. A calendar scratched into the wall stopped abruptly in mid-month, as if time itself had been interrupted. What was he doing before lockdown? Cruz asked. A correctional lieutenant shrugged. Same as always. Alone. Reed's body showed no obvious trauma. No struggle. No note. Just a stillness that felt wrong. Cruz had learned to trust that feeling. In the infirmary, the prison doctor kept his answers short. Just pre-existing conditions. Isolation-related decline. Words stacked neatly, forming a wall as solid as the prison itself. But when Cruz reviewed Reed's file, something stood out. 2 weeks earlier, he'd submitted a grievance, one of dozens filed by SHU inmates during renewed hunger strike whispers circulating inside the prison. Reed claimed guards had confiscated his legal papers. He named names. He asked for outside review. The grievance was marked resolved. No explanation attached. Cruz requested surveillance footage from the tier. The response came back almost immediately. Unavailable. A system outage, they said. That afternoon, Cruz met Jonah Blake, a civil rights attorney who'd spent years fighting Pelican Bay from the outside. He recognized Reed's name instantly. Marcus was lucid, Blake said. Sharp. He wrote letters for other inmates who couldn't keep their thoughts straight anymore. He told me something was coming. What kind of something? Cruz asked. Blake hesitated. Retaliation. He said the SHU had its own rules. If you made noise, you disappeared, but slowly. As night fell, Cruz returned to the SHU with a warrant to collect Reed's remaining property. A single box waited for her, state-issued clothes, a paperback missing its cover, and a stack of letters stamped but never mailed. Most were addressed to family members who hadn't written back in years. But one envelope stopped her cold. No address. No stamp. Just a name written carefully in pencil. Elena Cruz. Inside was a handwritten list of inmate numbers, guard shift schedules, and dates, spanning years. At the bottom, one line was underlined twice. If this reaches you, I didn't make it out. Cruz looked up at the silent tier stretching into darkness. Whatever happened to Marcus Reed wasn't an accident. And Pelican Bay was already closing ranks. By the time Detective Elena Cruz left Pelican Bay that night, her phone was already vibrating. The letters Marcus Reed had hidden were real, too real, and someone inside the prison knew she had them. The first warning came disguised as courtesy. The next morning, Cruz received a call from the Department of Corrections legal office. They thanked her for her interest and reminded her that deaths in the SHU fell under internal jurisdiction unless clear criminal indicators were present. The message was simple: stand down. She didn't. Cruz began tracing the names Reed had written. Inmate numbers tied to men who had spent a decade or more in solitary without a single violent infraction. Several had participated in the 2011 hunger strike. 2 more in 2013. One pattern repeated itself with chilling consistency. Each time an inmate filed repeated grievances or helped others do the same, something followed. A transfer. A write-up. A psychological downgrade. Or death. Officially, all natural causes. Cruz requested interviews with 3 inmates still housed in the SHU. The request was denied within an hour. Security concerns, the warden said, eyes steady, voice rehearsed. That afternoon, Jonah Blake called with urgency in his voice. One of Reed's friends tried to contact me from inside, he said. The call cut off mid-sentence. He said the guards were pulling people out of their cells last night. Quietly. Cruz drove back to the prison. This time, the gates didn't open easily. When she was finally escorted inside, the SHU felt different. Louder somehow. Doors slamming. Orders barked just a little too aggressively. The lieutenant who'd brushed her off before now watched her every step. In the medical wing, Cruz met Dr. Alan Hargreave, the psychologist assigned to SHU evaluations. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that seeped into bone. You didn't hear this from me, he said quietly, but Reed wasn't deteriorating. He was improving. Improving how? Cruz asked. Clarity. Memory. He told me isolation wasn't breaking him anymore. It was making him notice patterns. That scared people. Before Cruz could ask more, a guard appeared at the door. The interview ended. That night, Cruz reviewed surveillance logs from outside the prison. Delivery trucks. Staff arrivals. Shift changes. One detail stood out. A maintenance blackout logged the same night Reed died. Not a system outage, manual override. Someone had wanted darkness. The next morning, Cruz learned that inmate #C24591, one of the names on Reed's list, had been found unresponsive. Alive, but catatonic. Transferred to a psychiatric unit. No outside access. When Cruz attempted to visit him, her credentials were flagged. You're not authorized, the desk officer said. Since when? Since an hour ago. Cruz stepped outside, anger tightening her chest. Her phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. Stop digging. That was all the message said. She didn't go home. Instead, Cruz met Blake at his office, spreading Reed's letters across the table. One document, partially torn, caught her attention. It referenced an internal designation she hadn't seen before. Our status clearance. Blake's face drained of color. That's not disciplinary, he said. That's administrative. Off the books. They dug deeper, pulling old court filings, leaked memos, testimony buried in footnotes. Our status appeared nowhere officially, yet echoed across decades of sealed cases. Inmates marked with it lost privileges, legal access, and, eventually, their voices. Late that night, Cruz received an encrypted email. No sender. No greeting. Just a scanned incident report dated 15 years earlier. Different inmate. Same cell block. Same outcome. At the bottom, a familiar signature. Warden Thomas Hale. Current warden. Pelican Bay. Before Cruz could process it, her phone rang again, this time from the prison. Detective, the lieutenant said, breath tight. You need to get here now. Why? Another SHU inmate is dead. The pause. And this one left your name carved into the wall. As Cruz sped toward Pelican Bay, lights cutting through the coastal fog, one truth became impossible to ignore. Marcus Reed hadn't been silenced. He had started something. Pelican Bay locked down as Elena Cruz arrived, sirens echoing through the fog like a warning meant for her alone. Armed officers lined the yard. The SHU doors were sealed. Whatever had happened inside, the prison wanted it contained before it escaped the walls. The dead inmate was slumped against the far wall of his cell, knees drawn to his chest. His fingernails were torn, the concrete beneath them scratched raw. Above his head, carved deep enough to bleed stone, was a single word. Listen. Cruz stood frozen as the weight of it settled in. This wasn't chaos. It was communication. The autopsy would later rule the death a suicide. But Cruz already knew the truth. The man's wrists showed restraint marks. His tongue bore bruising consistent with forced gagging. Someone had been there with him. Someone who knew exactly how far to go without leaving obvious wounds. Back in her car, Cruz finally opened the final envelope Marcus Reed had hidden, one she'd been afraid to read. Inside was a timeline mapping out deaths, mental breakdowns, and medical events spanning over 20 years. Each incident aligned with grievances filed, hunger strikes supported, or legal assistance provided to other inmates. Reed had uncovered the prison's quietest weapon. Our status wasn't just isolation. It was a slow erasure program. Men labeled as persistent disruptors were subjected to intensified deprivation, sensory manipulation, sleep interruption, falsified psychological evaluations. The goal wasn't punishment. It was collapse. Cruz and Jonah Blake leaked the documents to federal investigators that same night. Within 48 hours, outside scrutiny descended on Pelican Bay. Civil rights lawyers, medical experts, journalists circling like vultures around a long-rotting secret. Warden Thomas Hale went on administrative leave. He denied everything, of course. Called it a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of security protocols. But when investigators seized internal servers, they found encrypted files marked with a familiar code. Our status. Emails detailed approval chains. Language stripped of humanity. Subject compliance achieved. Cognitive resistance decreasing. Recommend continuation. The public backlash was immediate. Former SHU inmates came forward, some barely able to speak in full sentences. Men who described losing the ability to remember faces, voices, even their own names. Men who said Marcus Reed had kept them alive by reminding them they were still human. Dr. Alan Hargreave resigned and later testified under immunity. He confirmed what Cruz suspected: psychological evaluations had been altered to justify prolonged isolation. Medical decline had been manufactured. The final blow came when an anonymous package arrived at a journalist's office. Inside was a flash drive containing surveillance footage thought to be erased. It showed Reed alive hours before his death, standing calmly at his cell door. Guards entered. The feed cut out. Pelican Bay issued an apology. Policy reforms were announced. Oversight committees formed. The SHU population was reduced. But for Cruz, the victory tasted hollow. Months later, she stood outside the prison as inmates were transferred out of solitary. Some walked unsteadily, shielding their eyes from the light. Others didn't speak at all. Marcus Reed wasn't there to see it. Cruz visited his grave alone. He had never asked for justice, only to be heard. As the investigation closed, one final detail surfaced, easy to miss, buried deep in the paperwork. Our status had been officially discontinued years earlier. Unofficially, a new designation had already replaced it. Different name. Same function. Different prison. Same silence. If this story unsettled you, it should. And if you think this was the darkest truth hiding behind prison walls, stay close. The next story is already waiting.